Hello everybody, it's Glitter Informer. Here's a fun fact. In Japanese time, this episode of Hirogaru Sky Pretty Cure aired on March 12th, which is Elle's birthday. With that said, let's jump right in. Our 6th episode starts with a recap of episodes 1, 4, and 5 narrated by Sora, with the framing device being her writing in her journal about how excited she is to be Mashiro's friend and partner. Except this also happened at the end of episode 5, so this is a flashback to a flashback. This recap goes on for a minute and a half. I explained in the episode 2 review that recaps don't make sense for a show like this because since the show is on so many streaming services, people are going to watch the episodes back to back. But it's even worse here since it takes up so much time. Finally, the episode starts for real. For the first time in the entire series, Mashiro heads off for school, which means we finally get to see her in her school uniform. This season's school uniform is absolutely adorable, with its heart-shaped belt buckle, asymmetric overshirt, and pretty shades of blue. You might be wondering why Mashiro hasn't been going to school for the past 5 episodes. Well, spring break just ended. It turns out Sora doesn't know what a school uniform is. However, she does know what school is, and she was going to school before she got stranded on Earth. She's really excited to accompany Mashiro to school. As the two leave the house together, we see the orange bird again. He will be important later, I swear. But alas, once Sora and Mashiro arrive at the school, Sora is stopped at the gates because outsiders aren't allowed onto the campus. Sora blurts out that in Skyland, everyone's allowed to enter schools. First of all, based Skyland? Second of all, come on, Sora. I could buy it that you weren't trying to keep your isekai origins a secret in episodes 1 and 2 because Mashiro hadn't told you to keep it under wraps yet. And in episode 4, when you let it slip to Agaha, that was one mistake. But now it's clear that it's a pattern of behavior and you know better. You know that Mashiro doesn't want to become the center of a huge crowd of paparazzi, which is what would happen if Skyland's existence became public knowledge on Earth. Seriously, it's not that hard to just not say Skyland. This running gag of Sora slipping up and accidentally talking about her home world contradicts her character traits and makes her look like an idiot. Moving on. In this scene, we see on the sign in front of the gates that Mashiro's school is called Sorashido Private Academy. We also get brief glimpses of the male school uniform, which is nowhere near as good looking as the female one. It looks super generic. If I were a boy at this academy, I'd be super jealous of the girls. So, while Mashiro goes off to school, Sora heads back to the house and busies herself with cleaning. She does literally all of the chores, plus studying on the side, plus training. And all of that takes her literally only 3 or so hours. Seriously, it's only 11:30 a.m. by the time she's run out of things to do. How is this girl such a speed demon? It would take me literally all day to clean just my room. It's such a mess. We briefly cut to Mashiro staring out the window and wondering what Sora's doing. Just like every anime protagonist ever, she's seated right next to the window, and just like in every anime classroom ever, the window is on the left side. How lucky! That being said, most anime characters sit in the second seat from the back next to the windows, while Mashiro sits in the very back. Ironically, the stereotypical anime protagonist seat is taken up by a background character. We return to Sora, who goes and talks to Yoyo since she has nothing else to do. Yoyo requests her help in grinding up some ingredients for the tunnel back to Skyland. It turns out that this is so tough that it challenges even Sora. Now that Sora realizes how hard Yoyo has been working this whole time, she apologizes for snapping at her last episode. Yoyo was never even offended in the first place, though. She asks Sora how she's holding up on Earth, and Sora says that she feels like she's too dependent on others and is always causing trouble. My dude, you've defeated how many giant monsters now? Plus, you've saved Mashiro's and Elle's lives multiple times, and you're an absolute speed demon at cleaning the house. You're being completely illogical. Yoyo asks if Sora wants to go to school with Mashiro, and Sora says no because she has too much to do at the house. But Yoyo can see right through her lies. So, she sends her to do some shopping, and while she's gone, she makes a very important phone call. So, remember in episode 3's review where I praised this season for being less in your face about its product placement than Tropical Rouge? Well, I think I might have to take that back. See, Hirogaru Sky has its own tropical melon bread analog, and it isn't bread. it's Pretty Holic. Pretty Holic has always been there, lurking in the background and even the foreground of this season. But it's particularly egregious this episode, as you'll see later, and it's made me realize just how often it's appeared in the show and just how much the company wants you to buy their products. Let's go down the list, shall we? The opening theme has a shot of a bunch of Pretty Holic cosmetics, bright and sparkling, and a brief sequence of Mashiro putting a bunch on Sora. Sora's Pretty Holic notebook appears in the title card at the beginning of every episode, even the first one. The eye catches in the middle of each episode that accompany the commercial breaks show Sora and Mashiro using Pretty Holic fragrance. In episode 1, there's a billboard ad for a Pretty Holic makeup and close-ups of the Pretty Holic stores and its products. In episode 2, there's an entire scene where the girls are in the Pretty Holic store and Mashiro buys Sora the Pretty Holic notebook, which appears in every single episode afterwards. In episode 5, Mashiro writes a letter to Agaha using Pretty Holic stationery. Later that episode, Sora and Mashiro pass by the Pretty Holic store, and Mashiro squeezes over the shiny powder fragrance, which she gleefully shows off to the camera. And here, Sora briefly stops by the Pretty Holic store, hears two background characters celebrate that they bought the powder fragrance, and then there's multiple close-ups of the fragrances as Sora says Mashiro would love them. And we're just getting started with the Pretty Holic advertising this episode. Then, lo and behold, Agaha enters the scene. She notices Sora's feeling down, so she takes her out for an afternoon dessert. It helps her feel better, but Agaha notices that her problem hasn't been resolved. She puts Sora's feelings into words when Sora can't. Sora's feeling lonely because she can't be with Mashiro. Sora finally realizes what's been getting her down all day. Agaha tells her to communicate those feelings to Mashiro, but Sora can't bring herself to do it because it's too embarrassing. And so, Agaha comes up with a plan to increase Sora's confidence. And here's where we get to what is essentially a 1 minute and 40-second advertisement for Pretty Holic makeup, as if all of the previous product placement wasn't enough to drill the message into the audience's heads to buy their merchandise. We get a ton of shots of all of the different Pretty Holic makeup products, from blush to lipstick to sparkly fragrance powder, and we see Agaha putting all of those things onto Sora, and Sora reacting with delight at all of them, even though she literally begins the scene by saying that makeup isn't her thing. Now, I do appreciate that the show emphasizes that the point of makeup isn't that you need it to look pretty and that you'll look ugly without it, which is unfortunately a common belief perpetuated about makeup. Rather, the point of the makeup is to increase Sora's confidence. She isn't putting on makeup to impress anybody, she's doing it for herself. That's a really empowering way to think of makeup. Or at least it would be if the whole point of this scene wasn't to make Toei tons and tons of money by selling Pretty Holic merchandise. This would be a lot more wholesome if it was just plain old generic makeup that they were using without any particular brand. This was actually done really nicely in the first episode of Tropical Rouge Pretty Cure, which is ironically enough the season from which Pretty Holic originated. In that episode, the main character, Manatsu, used her mother's lipstick whenever she needed a boost of confidence. Hirogaru Sky, by comparison, seems to be pushing the message that you need to buy Toei's product in order to feel confident about yourself, which is pretty toxic in my opinion. With that in-show advertisement out of the way, a newly encouraged Sora runs off to meet Mashiro at the gates of the school. There's this brief, ominous bit where everything goes grayscale and the music cuts out almost completely. It really feels in that moment like something terrible is about to happen to Sora, but nothing does. Then, on her way to find Mashiro, she stops to help an old lady cross the street, stops again to stop two delinquents from brawling, and then jumps over a gigantic roadblock put there by a very poorly disguised Kabaton in a construction outfit. I guess that Sora's so focused on getting to Mashiro that she doesn't even notice Kabaton at all. You'd think that all of these roadblocks, both figurative and literal, are being put there to set up Sora being late and missing Mashiro getting out of school, thus causing further conflict for Sora. But no, she reaches Mashiro right on time, so that was all just filler. Entertaining filler, but filler nonetheless. Sora tells Mashiro that she's been feeling weird all day, and it's because she wants to be with Mashiro. But she's barely able to get all of that out before Kabaton comes in and interrupts them. Wow, this guy just won't die. He says that he failed to defeat them last time because apparently when he ate the entire udon restaurant stock, that was too low calorie. So this time, he eats a gigantic sundae and turns a construction helmet into a Ron board. Also, Sora says that Kabaton's a waste of screen time and shouldn't even be on screen for a second. So I guess they're just aware that they're in a cartoon? Kabaton said lines like that imply this too. He's called Mashiro a side character several times before she became a pretty cure, but this line here is something else. So, Sora and Mashiro transform, and for the first time, their transformation sequences are edited together. Finally! But there are some things I'd like to nitpick. First of all, aside from the cure's self-introductions at the very end, Sora is the only one to speak during the transformation, even though for the most part, both Sora and Mashiro have the exact same lines. There's no reason they couldn't have had their lines played simultaneously. Hopefully this is just a one-time thing because this episode is focused on Sora and not something that's done for the rest of the show. Second of all, remember the split screen part near the end of the transformations? Something I didn't notice until I watched Aizenzone's review of episode 4 is that Cure Sky has some animations during this part, while Cure Prism just has still images, which is pretty lame. Starting in episode 5, they tried to fix it by adding animated sparkles above the images, but it just doesn't look as cool. It's especially jarring when the two transformations are stitched together because the split screen shots of Sky and Prism are mixed together. Okay, that's it for nitpicks. Something else to mention is that even though only 2 of the 4 cures have appeared, we already have a group pose. They jump into the air, there's a blast of smoke, and they touch down onto an open field of grass, which disappears into the ether right after they say their catchphrase. It's pretty cool. Now, onto the fight scene for this episode. First of all, this Ronborg is nowhere near the same level of threatening as the last episodes, and you can tell just by looking at Kabaton. He's his usual plump self instead of being skin and bones like he was after putting all of his energy into episode 5's Ronborg. Second of all, very little happens. The Cures dodge 2 attacks, easy peasy, then Cure Sky kicks the Ronborg and Cure Prism shoots projectiles at it. But since the Ronborg is made out of such strong material, nothing happens. Then the Ronborg makes a bunch of smoke, making it impossible for the Cures to see. That is, until they remember that they can jump really high, so they do so and use Updraft Shining, which the Ronborg is not invulnerable to. Not counting the Updraft Shining stock footage, the whole fight is over and done with in 1 minute and 15 seconds. It's just not very impressive. And to add insult to injury, the moment Sora's transformation sequence begins, her makeup mysteriously disappears. Even after the fight, her makeup is completely gone. So the whole thing about the makeup giving Sora the confidence to convey her true feelings to Mashiro, it ends up being useless anyways. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sora did say her true feelings to Mashiro, she was just interrupted right afterwards by Kabaton. But for some reason, this episode has another scene right after the fight where Sora says pretty much the same thing and they act like the previous conversation between Sora and Mashiro never happened. What's more, as Sora falters while speaking to Mashiro, Sora flashes back to the extended Pretty Holic advertisement scene, and she's much more confident after. This makes no sense. You're no longer wearing the makeup. How is the makeup making you more confident if it's gone? Toei is accidentally sending the message that you don't actually need their makeup to be confident after all. Which is a good thing, I guess, except that they didn't mean to do it and it contradicts the earlier bits of the episode. Be consistent, Toei! Anyways, after Sora finally tells Mashiro that she wants to be with her more, for the second time, Mashiro tells Sora that she's also lonely without her around. The two vent to each other about how difficult it was not seeing each other all day. Now that they've both gotten their feelings across, they head home, and they're delighted to hear Yoyo tell Sora that she got everything set up for Sora to go to Mashiro's school as well. And with that, this mixed bag of an episode ends at last. Oh, and the ending theme cameo for this episode? It's Cure Sky, even though she already appeared in the ending theme for episode 2. Was the 3D model for whatever past cure you were going to use not available? So, that's episode 6. I just don't know how to feel about this one. There were things I liked here. I appreciated Sora's conversation with Yoyo and how she came to understand just how hard Yoyo was working for her sake. It was also really great seeing Agaha again. I like her big sister vibe and how she's able to help Sora put her feelings into words. And for the most part, I appreciate how the show portrayed Sora and Mashiro being lonely without one another's company. But this episode is just dragged down by so many things. We have the egregious product placement, a lackluster fight scene, and the part where they kind of fumbled Sora's big confession to Mashiro at the end by having it happen, forgetting it already happened, and then making it happen again. Despite this, I can't say I outright disliked this episode. Unlike in episode 4, nobody was warped out of character or made egregiously idiotic decisions for the sake of the plot. Even if the plot itself is lacking, the characters hold it together well enough that this episode is ultimately just okay.